So there I was, Marcus Thompson, strapped to what looked like a neon disco ball crossed with a medieval torture device, but watching a countdown timer that apparently led to my very creative demise. The Galactic Court of Ultimate Justice, and yes, that's their actual name, had really outdone themselves with the theatrics this time. High Judge Vorthak, a purple blob with more tentacles than common sense, was reading my charges in a voice that sounded like a funeral director gargling mouthwash. Marcus Thompson of Earth, you stand accused of the heinous destruction of the sacred crystal of eternal whining on the peaceful planet of Sniffleton. Peaceful. Right. Sniffleton was about as peaceful as a daycare center during a sugar rush. The penalty, Vorthak continued, clearly enjoying himself, is death by quantum disintegration chamber, followed by immediate molecular reconstruction so we can execute you again for the insurance claim. I had to give it to them. Alien bureaucracy had really perfected the art of making everything unnecessarily complicated. The execution device hummed ominously above my head, looking like someone had crossed a chandelier with a blender and given it a serious attitude problem. Captain Blurble, the security chief who'd somehow managed to put my restraints on backwards twice, was fumbling with what I assumed was the activation switch. The guy had 6 arms and still couldn't figure out basic alien technology, but it was almost inspiring in its incompetence. "Countdown initiated," announced the court's AI in a voice that suggested it had given up on life long ago. Execution in 10 minutes and 37 seconds. The assembled crowd of various alien species settled in to watch the show. Nothing like a good old-fashioned human execution to bring the galaxy together, apparently. Some had even brought snacks. That's when I heard a small voice pipe up from the gallery. "Wait. Everyone turned to look at a tiny alien child, maybe 4 feet tall with oversized eyes and what appeared to be naturally occurring polka dots. She was raising one small hand like she was asking permission to go to the bathroom. "Yes, little Pip?" High Judge Vorthak's voice dripped with the condescending sweetness adults reserved for children who'd interrupted important grown-up business. Pip pointed directly at me with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to doubt herself. He didn't break the crystal. The courtroom fell silent except for the ominous humming of my pending Doom device. "Of course he did, dear," Vorthak said, his tentacles writhing in what I'd learned was alien equivalent of an eye roll. "We have witnesses and everything." "No," Pip said firmly. "He was busy saving Mr. Whiskers." And just like that, everything changed. The mention of Mr. Whiskers sent a visible shudder through the prosecution table. Ambassador Glitch, a tall, spindly creature who looked like a nervous ostrich, started sweating what appeared to be purple goo. "Who," I asked with the dry amusement of someone who'd already accepted his fate, "is Mr. Whiskers?" Pip beamed. "My pet space hamster. He got stuck in the crystal chamber's ventilation system, and the nice human helped me get him out." "Oh, that Mr. Whiskers. Now I remembered." "Your Honor," I said, settling back as comfortably as one could while strapped to an execution device, "if I may provide some context to this fascinating development." High Judge Vorthak's tentacles twitched impatiently. "Make it quick, human. The quantum disintegration chamber is already warmed up, and the energy bill is astronomical." Right, so there I was on Sniffleton, minding my own business at the interspecies cultural exchange, when I heard this weird squeaking sound coming from the walls near the sacred crystal. Turns out, little Pip here had lost her hamster in the air ducts. I glanced at Ambassador Glitch, who was now sweating enough purple goo to fill a small swimming pool. Now, while I was crawling through alien HVAC systems trying to rescue a rodent, Ambassador Glitch was in the crystal chamber doing— What exactly were you doing, Glitch? I was conducting official diplomatic business, Glitch stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager asking someone to prom. "Official diplomatic business," I repeated. "Is that what they're calling selfies these days?" The prosecutor, a stern-looking creature named Legal Eagle Craw, stood up abruptly. "This is highly irregular. The defendant cannot cross-examine witnesses during his own execution. Technically, I pointed out, I'm not dead yet, so I'm still allowed to talk. It's in the fine print of the Galactic Justice Code, subsection things we probably should have thought of earlier. Pip, bless her innocent little heart, chose that moment to speak up again. The crystal broke when the tall birdman tried to take a picture with it and dropped his communication device. The silence that followed was the kind you usually heard right before very expensive things exploded. Ambassador Glitch made a sound like air escaping from a punctured balloon. That's not. I would never. Oh, but you would, I said cheerfully. And you did. The question is, how long were you planning to let them disintegrate me before admitting you're clumsier than Captain Blurble over there? Captain Blurble, who had been listening while still trying to figure out which button started the execution, looked up indignantly. Hey, I resent that. I only destroyed 3 planets this week, and 2 of those were accidents. High Judge Vorthak's skin was shifting through several shades of purple that probably meant something significant in alien body language. This is preposterous. We have official testimony and sworn statements. You have a cover-up, I corrected, and apparently not a very good one since it's being unraveled by someone who probably still believes in the Tooth Fairy. I do believe in the Tooth Fairy, Pip said helpfully. She owes me 47 credits. That's when Pip reached into what appeared to be a sparkly backpack and pulled out a device no bigger than a tennis ball. I have pictures. The courtroom erupted in gasps, whispers, and what sounded like someone choking on their tentacles. Pictures? Legal Eagle Craw squawked. What pictures? From my surveillance drone, Pip said matter-of-factly. Daddy got it for me to keep track of Mr. Whiskers, but it records everything. Ambassador Glitch made a sound like a dying space whale. Your Honor, Defense Attorney Zorp, who until this moment had shown all the legal competence of a damp towel, suddenly found his backbone. I motion to examine this evidence immediately. High Judge Vorthak looked like he'd rather examine his own digestive system, but with half the galaxy watching, he couldn't exactly refuse. Very well. Display the recordings. Pip activated her little drone, and a holographic projection filled the center of the courtroom. There, in brilliant high-definition detail, was Ambassador Glitch standing next to the crystal of eternal whining, holding what was clearly a communication device at arm's length. Selfie time with the galaxy's most sacred artifact, I narrated helpfully. This should end well. The holographic Glitch was making faces at his device when the crystal began to resonate. Apparently, the sacred crystal of eternal whining didn't appreciate having its picture taken, because it started to vibrate ominously. Oh no, holographic Glitch said, reaching out to steady the crystal. Oh no indeed, I commented. The device slipped from Glitch's grasp, struck the crystal, and both shattered in a spectacular display of light and sound that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been completely catastrophic. Well, I said into the stunned silence, that explains the insurance claim. Captain Blurble, who had been watching the hologram with obvious confusion, accidentally activated something on the execution device. Instead of disintegrating me, it played what sounded like a jaunty space polka. Sorry, he mumbled, frantically pushing buttons. Wrong setting. Defense Attorney Zorp was practically vibrating with newfound confidence. Your Honor, this evidence clearly shows that my client was not present during the destruction of the crystal. Furthermore, it demonstrates that Ambassador Glitch perjured himself in his sworn testimony. It was an accident. Glitch wailed. The crystal was supposed to be indestructible. How was I supposed to know it was allergic to flash photography? Maybe, I suggested, by reading the 27 warning signs posted around it? You know, the ones that said do not photograph in 47 languages, including large print and braille? Legal Eagle Craw was looking through a stack of papers with increasing desperation. This doesn't prove anything. The defendant could have orchestrated this entire situation to create reasonable doubt. Right, I said. I masterminded an elaborate scheme involving a child, her pet hamster, and a clumsy diplomat, just so I could avoid execution by creating evidence of my innocence. Because that makes perfect sense. Pip, who had been following the adult conversation with the intense focus children reserved for things they found interesting, raised her hand again. There's more. Every alien in the courtroom collectively held their breath. More what, dear? High Judge Vorthak asked in the tone of someone who really didn't want to know the answer. More recordings, Pip said brightly. My drone follows Mr. Whiskers everywhere, and Mr. Whiskers goes everywhere he's not supposed to. I had to admire the kid's timing. She waited until Ambassador Glitch had gone from purple goo sweating to full-on purple goo leaking before continuing. Like the meeting where the Birdman and the Judge-Man talked about blaming the human, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop about 20 degrees. High Judge Vorthak's tentacles went completely rigid, which in alien body language probably meant something like, oh, feces. That's impossible, Vorthak sputtered. There was no such meeting. Tuesday, Pip said with the casual certainty of someone stating that water was wet. Right after lunch. Mr. Whiskers got into your office through the air vent, and my drone followed him. Legal Eagle Craw made a desperate attempt at damage control. Your Honor, we cannot allow the testimony of surveillance equipment operated by a minor too. Actually, I interrupted. According to Galactic Evidence Code subsection technology doesn't lie even when adults do. Any recorded evidence is admissible regardless of who operates the recording device. It's the same law you used to convict me in the first place. Defense Attorney Zorp was practically glowing with professional satisfaction. I motioned to view all recordings in the drone's memory bank. Motion denied, Vorthak said quickly. This court will not be subject to the invasion of privacy represented by. That's when the courtroom doors burst open and in walked two aliens who clearly meant business. They had the look of diplomats who just discovered their child was in the middle of an interstellar incident. Pip. The female alien called. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school. Mommy. Pip waved cheerfully. I'm helping save the human from being executed for something he didn't do. The male alien, who I assumed was Pip's father, looked around the courtroom with the expression of someone rapidly putting pieces together. Executed. For what crime? The destruction of the crystal of eternal whining on Sniffleton, High Judge Vorthak said, his voice now noticeably less confident. Pip's father's skin shifted to a shade of blue that probably meant something significant. The crystal that was destroyed last week while our family was visiting for the cultural exchange? The very same, I said helpfully. Though, as it turns out, your daughter has some interesting footage of what actually happened. That's when Ambassador Glitch finally cracked completely. It was an accident. The whole thing was an accident. But the insurance payout was enormous, and the trade restrictions against humans would have been so profitable, and nobody was supposed to get hurt because we were going to commute the sentence at the last minute. Except then the political situation changed and suddenly we had to go through with it, and… Glitch, High Judge Vorthak hissed. Shut up. I can't shut up. Glitch wailed. The guilt is eating me alive. Plus, the kid has everything on video anyway. Meanwhile, Captain Blurble had finally figured out how to operate the execution device, except instead of activating it, he'd somehow managed to release my restraints. I sat up, rubbing my wrists, and decided to stay put. This was getting interesting. So let me get this straight, I said. You accidentally destroyed your own sacred crystal, decided to frame me for it to collect insurance money, and justify trade restrictions against humanity, and your brilliant plan was undone by a child with a pet hamster? When you put it like that, Glitch sniffled, it sounds really stupid. That's because it is really stupid, I pointed out. Pip's parents, who I learned were actually high-ranking diplomats from the Sniffleton embassy, were having what appeared to be a very intense conversation with several court officials. The kind of conversation that involved a lot of gesturing and the sort of tones adults used when someone was in very serious trouble. "Your Honor," Pip's mother said, stepping forward, "I believe we need to discuss the implications of this conspiracy." High Judge Vorthak was now shifting through colors I didn't even have names for. "There's no conspiracy. This is all a misunderstanding that's gotten blown out of proportion by—" "Daddy," Pip interrupted, tugging on her father's diplomatic robes. "Should I show them the part where the judge man talked about making the human disappear, even if they found out the truth?" The silence that followed was the kind you usually heard right before governments fell. "You recorded that too?" I asked, genuinely impressed. "Mr. Whiskers got into the ventilation system in the judge's private chambers," Pip explained. "He likes shiny things, and there were lots of shiny bribe crystals." Legal Eagle Craw threw his papers in the air in frustration. "This is a disaster. A complete disaster. How is a child's toy drone bringing down our entire judicial system?" "Maybe," I suggested, "because your judicial system is held together with corruption and stupidity?" Defense attorney Zorp, who was apparently having the best day of his legal career, stood up with newfound confidence. "Your Honor, in light of these revelations, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, plus damages for wrongful prosecution, plus additional damages for psychological trauma, plus court costs, plus—" "We get it, Zorp," I said. "You found your backbone. Don't overdo it." That's when High Judge Vorthak made his final mistake. Even if there were irregularities in this case, the defendant has still been found guilty by a jury of his peers and— "What jury?" I asked. "You never gave me a jury trial. You went straight to sentencing." The remaining color drained out of Vorthak's tentacles. That's a minor procedural oversight. A minor procedural oversight that violates about 17 different sections of the Galactic Justice Code, Pip's father said grimly, including the ones that carry mandatory sentences for judicial misconduct. Captain Blurble, who had been quietly trying to figure out how to turn off the execution device, accidentally activated what appeared to be a containment field around the judge's bench. High Judge Vorthak and Legal Eagle Craw were suddenly trapped behind a shimmering energy barrier. "Sorry," Blurble mumbled. "Still getting used to the controls." "Actually," I said, "I think you should leave that on for a while." Ambassador Glitch, meanwhile, had collapsed into what appeared to be a confession-induced coma. He was making small, whimpering sounds and muttering about insurance fraud and trade violations. Pip, oblivious to the chaos she'd caused, was showing her parents the various recordings on her drone. And this is the part where they talked about splitting the insurance money, and this is where they discussed falsifying the evidence reports, and oh, this is my favorite part where Mr. Whiskers knocked over the secret bribe crystal collection. "How much of the government's illegal activities did your hamster witness?" I asked. "All of it," Pip said cheerfully. "Mr. Whiskers is very thorough." I had to respect that. In a galaxy full of corrupt politicians and incompetent bureaucrats, apparently the most effective investigator was a small rodent with a tendency to get into places he didn't belong. The courtroom had devolved into complete chaos. Various officials were arguing with each other. Pip's parents were making urgent communications to what I assumed were very important people, and Captain Blurble was still trying to figure out which end of his security equipment was supposed to point at the criminals. "You know what the best part is?" I said to no one in particular. They called humans primitive. 3 hours later, the charges against me weren't just dropped. They were launched into the nearest star and told never to come back. High Judge Vorthak and Legal Eagle Craw were facing their own date with the very execution device they'd been so eager to use on me, but though I suspected their lawyers were significantly more competent than mine had been. Ambassador Glitch was currently in what the aliens called protective custody, and what humans would recognize as hiding in a bunker until this all blows over. The insurance fraud charges alone were going to keep him busy for the next several decades. Pip, meanwhile, had been declared a hero of galactic justice, which came with a small medal and a college scholarship. More importantly to her, she'd been given an official permit for Mr. Whiskers to go anywhere he wanted in government buildings, as long as his surveillance drone was recording. "So," I said to Pip as we sat in the embassy waiting room while her parents filled out what appeared to be 17 different sets of paperwork, "what are you going to do with your newfound fame?" "I want to visit Earth," she said without hesitation. "Daddy says humans have something called ice cream." "We do indeed. And I think Mr. Whiskers would love Earth. We have lots of places for small creatures to explore where they're not supposed to be." Captain Blurble appeared in the doorway, somehow managing to look both relieved and confused. "The transport to Earth is ready, Mr. Thompson. Also, I think I accidentally promoted myself to Admiral while trying to file your release paperwork." "Congratulations, Admiral Blurble. Try not to destroy any planets on the way to Earth." "I'll do my best, sir." As we prepared to leave, I couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here I was, saved from execution by a child who'd told the truth, while the advanced alien civilization had nearly executed an innocent being for the sake of insurance money and trade politics. "Pip," I said as we walked toward the transport, "you know what you did was pretty amazing, right?" "I just told the truth," she said with the matter-of-fact tone children used for stating the obvious. "Adults make everything so complicated." "Yeah," I agreed. "We really do." As our transport lifted off from the space station, I looked out at the stars and smiled. Somewhere out there, alien bureaucrats were probably having emergency meetings about how to prevent future incidents involving small children and their pets. Meanwhile, humanity's reputation had been saved by a kid who simply believed that telling the truth was more important than protecting adults from their own stupidity. Mr. Whiskers, secure in his travel carrier, made a small squeaking sound that I chose to interpret as agreement. "You know what the real joke is?" I said to Pip as we headed toward Earth. "They spent all this time calling humans primitive, and it took a child to teach them about justice." Pip considered this seriously. "Maybe they're the primitive ones." "Maybe they are, kid. Maybe they are. And that's how I learned that in a galaxy full of corrupt politicians, incompetent bureaucrats, and overly complicated legal systems, sometimes the most advanced thing you can do is just tell the truth. Even if you're small, even if adults don't want to listen, and even if your only witness is a space hamster with a talent for being in the wrong place at exactly the right time. Humanity, as it turned out, was doing just fine.